We continue building our interface by adding controls to our form. And we're going to look in this video at the TextBox control. The principal controls we'll use initially in this class are TextBox, labels, buttons, and picture boxes, and also to introduce you to the image list control. So I'm going to choose TextBox here in the toolbox. It is under the common control, so if that is not expanded, you need to expand that first, and choose TextBox. Now there's three ways we can add a text box to our form. One is simply to select the control here in our toolbox, come over to our form somewhere and click, and that will add a text box. The other way is simply take the text box and drag. And then a third way is take that text box tool and draw a box by moving from one corner to the diagonally opposite corner. Now you notice when I let go of this box, it's considerably wider and considerably higher than the other two default text boxes. But when I let go of it, watch what happens. Its width is the same. That is because of a property called multiline, and by default, multiline is set to false. If I were to change that and set it to true, it would now take on the size that I had specified. Otherwise, it's only going to allow one line of text, and so automatically compresses to that line based on how large of a font we have selected within the font property. So let's take a look at a couple of these different properties. I'm going to go ahead and delete these first two text boxes, and we'll work with this third one. The first property you probably want to work with in a text box might be the text property. So I'm going to type in some text here, so you can see what that's going to look like with text in it. So as I type in South Mountain and press the Enter key, that's going to control what is displayed in that text box. That's the text property. There's also a property here called Text Align, and there's a drop-down button for that Text Align property. And my choices here are either left aligned, right aligned, or centered. So if I choose center, it'll be centered in the text box. I'm going to go back to left. I'm going to go ahead and add some more text here. So I can modify this text property. South Mountain is located in Phoenix, Arizona. Now, by the way, there's a little drop-down box here. I can't see a lot of what I've typed into this text property, but if I click on this little drop-down arrow, I have a larger text field that I can enter into, including the ability to be able to do multiple lines. Okay, so there's my text. It doesn't quite fit this text box, and remember I'd set that multi-line property back to false. If I set it back to true, it's going to wrap around within that text box. And that is also because the word wrap property is set to true. If I set that to false, it will not wrap. I'll set it back to true. As I change the handles, I can force it to wrap across multiple lines, or I can stretch it out and have it just on one line. So there is also a property for size, and that is dictating the size of my text box. And if I were to change this width, say from 165 to 100, and press the Enter key, notice it's going to compress as far as the width. I'll set it back to 165. There's also a visible property here, and there may be times when you don't want this text box to show up to the user. I'm going to set this to false. And notice it didn't disappear, and that's because I'm working in the IDE, but if I were to test my program, we would see that that text box goes away. And I could set it back to having the visible property set to true. By the way, to get the properties for the text box, it has to be selected. So if my form is selected, I'm seeing the properties for the form. I need to click on the text box to get those properties. I'm going to set this back to true. And now if I test my application, we will see the text box is indeed there. Now because it's the only text box, it's getting what's called the focus, and the text is going to be selected. I can click somewhere, I can edit it as the user. So So I could say is located on 24th Street and Baseline in Phoenix, Arizona. So I can edit this text box. If I don't want to allow the user to edit it, I can change the read-only property to true. And so now if I run the application, I can still select the text. I can put a cursor there, but I can't type into the text. Nothing is allowed in. It is read-only. I'm going to go back to the IDE by closing my application. There is a location property. It tells me where it's located in my form, and this is measured in pixels. The first measurement is from the left edge, so it's 46 pixels from the left, and 130 pixels from the top. You can type values in here, so if I wanted to bring this up, I could say I want this to be, let me just do 100, 100. Press the Enter key, and it is now 100 pixels on the left, 100 pixels on the right. In most cases, when I'm moving things around in the form, I'm just going to grab them and move them. So as I point to the text box, I get the four-headed arrow as far as my mouse pointer, and I can move this in any direction. There is a border style property. There are three different choices for border style. The default for a new text box is fixed 3D. What I'm going to do is, just so you can see the difference, is I'm going to take this text box and I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it so that we have three of them. And I'll set this first one so the border style is set to none. We'll set this one so the border style is set to fixed single, and this one is fixed 3D. Now the fixed 3D really doesn't show up very well here because of the colors I've chosen. If you look really, really closely, you can probably tell there's a little bit of a shadow at the top there. Let me change my color for the form and see if this will show up a little bit better. So I'm going to change the back color of the form to System Control. Run my application. And so now you can see this just looks like it's typed on the form. There is no border. Here we have a fixed single border, kind of a square around it. And this is a 3D appearance. And you get a little shadow here on the left and top, and then a highlight at the bottom and right. So those are the three different styles of borders. On the 3D style, the fixed 3D, it looks like the text box is sort of recessed in a little bit into the form. I'm going to delete those two text boxes, come back to this one. We'll set it back to fixed 3D, which is the default. We can also change the color. So the back color is the interior of that text box. I'll make it yellow. And then the fore color is the text itself. Let's make it red. There is a locked property which is currently set to false. That's default. I'm going to change that to true. And when the control is locked, that means I can't move it here in the IDE. So once you get your form set up, you may want to lock your controls. They can't be moved accidentally. And then the last property we'll look at in terms of text boxes, and you notice there's a whole lot more than what we're actually examining here, but that's the font property. And the font property lets me change the font and the size and the style. There's a little button on the right-hand side of the font property with 3 ellipses or 3 periods. And anytime you see a button or a menu item with 3 ellipses or 3 periods, that is a standard notation that's going to bring up a dialog box. So when I click this button, I get the font dialog. And here in the font dialog, I can choose a different font. I can set a style, and I can change the size. And when I close that dialog box, it will apply the font to the text box. Now, I might need to stretch this back out. I can't do that because it's locked, so I may need to now come in and unlock it. Then I can grab the handles, and I can change the size or change the location of that text box. The last thing we'll look at is the name property. And when I create a text box, by default, it is named TextBox 1, TextBox 2, TextBox 3, and so forth in the order in which I created these. And remember, we copied and pasted that text box. This was the third one, and that's why it's named TextBox 3. It's not a very meaningful name. Typically, we want to give this a name that's a little more meaningful. And for text boxes, in VB, we tend to start a text box with the letters TXT. This is called Hungarian notation. It's a nice visual clue that this named object is a text box. Most C# programmers don't follow that Hungarian notation, but you'll find that since I'm teaching both VB and C# in this class, I'm going to do it for both. It doesn't hurt, but I'm going to give this a little more meaningful name in terms of TXT location. I capitalize the L, that's the camel casing. Can't be any spaces. The name has to start with a letter. Can contain numbers and underscores, but no other special characters. So it has a meaningful name that, as I refer to it in code, will make a little more sense. If I'm not going to refer to an object in code, I usually don't bother to name it. If I'm going to refer to it in code, it's a good idea to give it a meaningful name.